Welcome back to Hold On, Survival Stories, where we bring you the most heart-stopping, edge-of-your-seat true stories of human endurance, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that can mean the difference between life and death. I'm your host, and today's story will test everything you think you know about friendship, survival, and the depths of human determination. Picture this: 5 best friends, armed with nothing but backpacks, hiking boots, and an unshakable faith in each other's abilities. They are about to embark on what should have been a perfect autumn adventure through one of Colorado's most stunning but treacherous wilderness areas. What none of them could have predicted was that their weekend getaway would transform into a desperate race against time, where every decision could mean the difference between bringing everyone home safely or leaving someone behind forever. This is the true story of what happened on October 14, 2022, when a single misstep in Colorado's Devil's Canyon turned a dream hiking trip into a nightmare that would push 5 friends to their absolute limits. It's a story about the weight of impossible choices, the crushing burden of responsibility, and the moment when ordinary people discover they are capable of extraordinary things. Our story begins with 5 friends who had been inseparable since college. Marcus Chen, 28, a software engineer with an infectious laugh and an obsession with outdoor photography. Sarah Rodriguez, 27, a nurse whose calm demeanor masked an adventurous spirit that craved the mountains more than anything else in the world. Jake Thompson, 29, a construction foreman whose practical skills and steady hands had gotten the group out of minor scrapes before. Emma Walsh, 26, a teacher whose optimism could light up the darkest trail and whose determination was legendary among their group. And finally, David Kim, 28, a paramedic whose medical training made him the unofficial safety officer of every expedition. These weren't inexperienced weekend warriors. They had been hiking together for 6 years, tackling increasingly challenging trail across the American West. They had weathered storms above treeline, navigated by compass when GPS failed, and had always prided themselves on their preparedness and mutual trust. But Devil's Canyon was different. Devil's Canyon didn't forgive mistakes. Located in the remote backcountry of Colorado's San Juan Mountains, Devil's Canyon earned its ominous name from early miners who told stories of men who entered the canyon and were never seen again. The canyon is a geological maze of towering red rock walls, hidden slot canyons, and massive boulder fields that have been carved by millions of years of flash floods and erosion. It's stunningly beautiful and absolutely deadly. The canyon is notorious among experienced hikers for its unpredictable weather, its maze-like terrain that can disorient even seasoned navigators, and its treacherous rock formations that can shift without warning. Search and rescue teams have pulled dozens of injured hikers from Devil's Canyon over the years, and several have never been found at all. But our 5 friends weren't deterred by the canyon's reputation. They had spent months planning this trip, studying topographical maps, checking weather forecasts, and preparing for every contingency they could imagine. They carried more gear than usual: extra food, emergency bivouacs, first aid supplies, and multiple communication devices. They had filed detailed trip plans with the local ranger station and had check-in times scheduled with family members. What they couldn't have prepared for was the one thing that no amount of planning can prevent: a split-second accident that would turn their carefully orchestrated adventure into a desperate fight for survival. The morning of October 14th dawned crisp and clear, with temperatures in the low 40s and not a cloud in the sky. Perfect hiking weather. The 5 friends met at the trailhead parking area at sunrise, their breath visible in the cold mountain air, as they went through their final gear checks and distributed emergency supplies among their packs. "This is going to be epic," Emma declared, shouldering her pack with characteristic enthusiasm. I've been dreaming about this view from Devil's Peak for months. Marcus was already snapping photos of the sunrise, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. The light is incredible, he said, adjusting his camera setting. We're going to get some amazing shots today. Sarah checked her GPS one final time and reviewed their route with the group. 12 miles to Devil's Peak, 8 hours round trip if we maintain our usual pace. Weather looks stable all day. Everyone ready? Jake did a final check of the group's gear distribution, making sure the emergency supplies were evenly spread among their packs. Emergency bivouac with David, first aid with Sarah, extra water with Emma, navigation backup with Marcus. We're set. David, ever the medical professional, reminded everyone about the day's safety protocols. Remember, we stick to the planned route, no shortcuts. If anyone feels dizzy, nauseated, or short of breath, we stop immediately. And if we're not at the turnaround point by noon, we head back regardless of how close we are to the summit. These 5 friends had developed their safety protocols through years of hiking together. They trusted each other completely, had never had a serious accident, and approached every adventure with the perfect balance of excitement and caution that separates experienced outdoor enthusiasts from reckless thrill seekers. As they set off into Devil's Canyon, following a narrow trail that wound between massive red rock formations, none of them could have imagined that in just 4 hours, one of them would be trapped beneath tons of stone, fighting for their life, while the others faced the most agonizing decisions any friend should ever have to make. This is their story, a story of friendship tested by impossible circumstances, of split-second decisions that echo for a lifetime, and of the moment when 5 ordinary people discovered what they were truly made of, when everything went wrong in the most spectacular and terrifying way possible. The trail into Devil's Canyon begins deceptively peacefully. For the first 2 miles, hikers follow a well-maintained path through stands of aspen trees, whose golden leaves create a canopy of natural confetti overhead. The sound of crunching leaves underfoot mingles with the distant rush of Devil's Creek, which runs along the bottom of the canyon like a silver thread, weaving through the red rock maze. But this peaceful beginning is misleading. Devil's Canyon reveals its true character gradually, like a predator that allows its prey to venture deeper into its territory before showing its teeth. Marcus was in his element, stopping every few hundred yards to capture the interplay of light and shadow on the canyon walls. The way the morning light hits these formations, he called out to the group. It's like the rocks are glowing from within. Sarah was maintaining their pace, checking her GPS regularly, and keeping mental notes of their progress. As the group's unofficial navigator, she felt responsible for keeping them on schedule and on route. We're making good time, she announced. If we maintain this pace, we'll reach the boulder field by 10:30. The boulder field. Even the name should have served as a warning. Jake was walking point, using his construction experience to spot potential hazards on the trail ahead. Watch this loose section, he called back, as they navigated around a recent rock slide. Step where I step and test each foothold. Emma was documenting their journey in the small journal she carried on every hike, capturing not just the physical details of their route, but the emotions and experiences that made each adventure memorable. The energy in this canyon is incredible, she wrote during a brief rest stop. It feels ancient, powerful, almost alive. David was monitoring everyone's condition, watching for signs of altitude sickness or fatigue. At 9,000 feet elevation, the thin air could affect even experienced hikers, and the physical demands of navigating rocky terrain required constant vigilance. As they progressed deeper into the canyon, the landscape began to change dramatically. The friendly aspen groves gave way to stark red rock walls that towered hundreds of feet above them. The trail became more challenging, requiring occasional scrambling over rock ledges and careful navigation around drop-offs that plunged into darkness. This place is incredible, Emma breathed, pausing to take in the view, but it's also kind of intimidating. You can really feel how small you are here. She had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. By 9:30 a.m., they had reached what local hikers call the decision point, a place where the main trail splits into two options. The easier route adds 3 miles to the hike, but follows a well-established path with minimal technical challenges. The more direct route cuts through the heart of the boulder field, saving time and distance, but requiring careful navigation through a maze of house-sized rocks that have been tumbling into the canyon for millennia. The 5 friends had studied this decision point extensively during their planning. The direct route through the boulder field would save them nearly 2 hours of hiking time, leaving more time to enjoy the summit and reducing their overall exposure to potential afternoon weather changes. "What do you think?" Sarah asked the group, consulting her map. "The boulder field route is definitely more challenging, but we've all done similar terrain before." Jake studied the massive rock formations that lay ahead of them. "The rocks look stable, and the weather is perfect. I don't see any immediate hazards." David checked his watch and considered their timeline. "If we take the longer route, we'll be cutting it close on our turnaround time. The boulder field gets us there with time to spare." Marcus was already envisioning the dramatic photographs he could capture among the massive rock formations. "The compositions in that boulder field are going to be amazing. I vote for the direct route." Emma, always the optimist, sealed their decision. "We're experienced, we're prepared, and we're together. Let's do it." It was a decision that made perfect sense based on their experience, preparation, and the conditions they could observe. It was also a decision that would change all of their lives forever. The boulder field stretched out before them like an alien landscape. Massive red sandstone rocks, some as large as buildings, were scattered across the canyon floor in a seemingly random pattern. These weren't ordinary hiking trail boulders. They were geological giants that had broken away from the canyon walls over thousands of years, creating a three-dimensional maze that required constant problem-solving to navigate. The rocks varied dramatically in size and shape. Some were smooth and rounded, worn by eons of wind and water. Others were sharp and angular, their surfaces textured with natural handholds and footholds. Many were balanced precariously on smaller rocks, creating archways and tunnels that the friends had to crawl through or carefully circumnavigate. "This is like nature's playground," Emma laughed, as she squeezed through a narrow passage between two massive boulders. "If you were a giant, this would be the ultimate jungle gym." The route through the boulder field wasn't marked by any official trail. Instead, hikers had to follow cairns, small stacks of rocks built by previous travelers to mark the safest path. But cairns could be unreliable, especially in an area where rocks regularly shifted due to weather and seismic activity. Jake took the lead, using his construction experience to assess the stability of each route option. "This rock looks solid," he would call back, "or avoid this section. I can see some loose material." Marcus was in photographer's paradise, stopping frequently to capture the dramatic interplay of light and shadow among the massive formations. "The scale is incredible," he marveled. "These rocks make us look like ants." Sarah was working harder than usual to maintain their navigation, since traditional trail markers were non-existent in the boulder field. She had to rely on GPS coordinates and compass bearings, constantly checking their position against her topographical map. David was moving more cautiously than the others, his paramedic training making him hyper-aware of the potential for injury in such technical terrain. "Everyone take your time," he reminded the group regularly. "A twisted ankle out here could turn into a real problem." Emma was loving every minute of the challenge. "This is what hiking is all about," she called out, as she scrambled up a particularly tricky rock face. "Real adventure, real problem-solving, real teamwork." For 2 hours, they made steady progress through the boulder field. The route was challenging but manageable, requiring careful route finding and occasional teamwork to help each other over difficult sections. They were experienced hikers, working as a well-coordinated team, and they were successfully navigating one of Colorado's most challenging hiking environments. They had no way of knowing that they were approaching a section of the boulder field that had been fundamentally altered by recent geological activity. A combination of heavy spring snowmelt and summer thunderstorms had shifted several massive rocks in ways that weren't visible from the surface. What appeared to be solid, stable terrain was actually a carefully balanced trap, waiting for the wrong amount of pressure, applied in exactly the wrong place. At 11:15 a.m., they approached what appeared to be a straightforward section of the route. A series of moderately sized boulders created a natural staircase that would allow them to gain elevation quickly and efficiently. Jake scouted the route and found it solid. Sarah confirmed that it matched their intended bearing. David checked it for obvious hazards and found none. Emma volunteered to test the route first. "This looks perfect," she announced, shouldering her pack and stepping confidently onto the first boulder. And that's when everything went wrong. The rock that appeared solid was actually balanced on a smaller stone that had been undermined by recent water erosion. When Emma's full weight herself plus her 25-pound pack landed on the boulder, it shifted just enough to destabilize a carefully balanced system that had been stable for decades. The boulder tipped forward with a grinding sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. Emma tried to jump backward, but her pack's weight pulled her off balance. She fell forward as the massive rock rolled, and her right leg disappeared into a gap between two house-sized boulders that had been invisible until that moment. The sound was terrifying, a combination of grinding stone, Emma's scream, and the sickening crunch of crushing impact. Then, suddenly, there was complete silence, except for the sound of Emma's ragged breathing, echoing from somewhere deep within the rocks. Emma Marcus shouted, dropping his camera and rushing toward the rocks where she had disappeared. "Don't move," David commanded, his medical training overriding his panic. "Nobody else approaches until we understand what happened." Sarah was already on her radio, trying to raise emergency services, but the canyon walls blocked their signal completely. Jake was studying the rock formation, trying to understand what had caused the collapse and whether it was stable now. And somewhere below them, trapped between tons of unforgiving stone, Emma was fighting to stay conscious as crushing pain shot through her right leg, and the terrifying reality of her situation began to sink in. "Guys," Emma's voice drifted up from the rocks, weak and filled with fear. "I can't move my leg. I think I'm really stuck." The adventure had just become a nightmare, and the hardest choices were yet to come. The silence that followed Emma's faint call for help was deafening. Four friends stood frozen at the edge of a rock formation that had just swallowed their companion, their minds struggling to process what had happened in the span of 3 terrible seconds. David was the first to overcome the shock, his paramedic training kicking in like a well-rehearsed emergency protocol. "Emma, can you hear me clearly?" he called down into the rocks. "Yes," came the reply, but Emma's voice was strained and weak. "David, I'm scared. I can't feel my foot." The words sent a chill through the group that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Loss of sensation could indicate nerve damage, crushing injury, or worse, circulatory compromise that could lead to tissue death if not addressed quickly. Jake was already moving, but carefully, testing each step as he approached the edge of the gap where Emma had fallen. "I'm going to look down and see what we're dealing with," he announced. "Everyone else stay back until we know this area is stable." What Jake saw when he peered into the gap made his stomach lurch. Emma was wedged approximately 8 feet down in a narrow crevice between two massive boulders. Her right leg was trapped from mid-thigh down, pinned between the rocks with no visible way to extract it. The boulder that had shifted when she stepped on, it was now resting on top of her trapped leg, adding its weight to the crushing force. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Jake looked back at his friends, and the expression on his face told them everything they needed to know. "It's bad. She's pinned pretty deep, and there's a lot of weight on her leg." Sarah was frantically working with her radio and GPS, trying different positions and frequencies in an attempt to reach emergency services. "I can't get a signal," she reported, her usual calm demeanor showing cracks of panic. "The canyon walls are blocking everything." Emma's voice drifted up from the rocks again, and this time they could hear tears. "It hurts so much. Please tell me you can get me out of here." David positioned himself at the edge of the gap, where he could communicate most clearly with Emma. "I need you to listen to me carefully. Can you wiggle your toes?" A pause. Then, "I don't think so. I can't tell." I can't feel anything below my knee. The medical implications were severe. Crushing injuries could cause compartment syndrome, where swelling within muscle compartments cut off blood flow. Prolonged compression could lead to tissue death, systemic toxicity, and death. David knew they were looking at a medical emergency that required immediate intervention. Emma, I need you to try to stay calm, David called down. We're going to get you out, but I need you to help me monitor your condition. Are you having any trouble breathing? It's hard to take deep breaths, Emma replied. My chest feels tight. That could indicate internal injuries, panic-induced hyperventilation, or compression of her diaphragm from her trapped position. All with serious concern. Marcus was pacing frantically, his photographer's eye automatically assessing angles and approaches. There has to be a way to move these rocks. Jake, what do you think? Can we shift them somehow? Jake was studying the boulder configuration with the analytical mind of someone who worked with heavy materials every day. What he saw was both simple and hopeless. The rock that's pinning her weighs probably 3,000 to 4,000 pounds. It's wedged against the other boulder in a way that creates mechanical advantage, meaning it's actually harder to move than if it were just sitting on level ground. So we can't move it, Sarah asked. Not without heavy equipment. Probably not without explosives. The word explosives hung in the air like a death sentence. They were 12 miles from the nearest road, in terrain where helicopter rescue would be challenging, even in perfect conditions. Getting heavy equipment to this location would take days, assuming it was even possible. Emma had been listening to this conversation from her rock prison, and her voice when she spoke next was tight with panic. Are you saying you can't get me out? Are you saying I'm going to die down here? Nobody's dying, David said firmly, though his own voice betrayed his uncertainty. We're going to figure this out, but I need you to stay as calm as possible. Panic uses energy and oxygen that you need to conserve. Sarah had moved to higher ground, still desperately trying to establish radio contact. Maybe if I can get to the ridge line, I can get enough signal to call for help. How long would that take? David asked. Sarah consulted her map and GPS. 2 hours to get there, plus however long it takes to establish contact and coordinate rescue. 4 hours minimum, probably 6. Emma's medical condition might not allow for that kind of delay. David was running calculations in his head: blood loss, shock, hypothermia, compartment syndrome. Even if rescue arrived in 6 hours, they might be too late. Marcus was studying the rock formation from every angle, looking for alternative approaches. What if we could approach from below? Maybe there's another way into this crevice. Jake shook his head. I've been looking. This gap goes down, maybe 15 feet before it narrows to nothing. There's no way to get underneath her position. What about from above? Marcus pressed. Could we rappel down and attach some kind of pulley system? With what? Jake asked. We'd need climbing gear, steel cable, maybe even hydraulic jacks. We're talking about thousands of pounds of force here. Emma's voice interrupted their brainstorming, and this time it carried a note of real terror. Guys, something's wrong. My leg feels cold, and I'm getting dizzy. David's medical training immediately identified the symptoms: shock, possible internal bleeding, and potential vascular compromise. Emma's condition was deteriorating, and they were running out of time. Emma, I need you to check something for me, David called down. Can you reach your pulse at your wrist? A pause while Emma struggled to reach her arm into a position where she could check her pulse. It's really fast, she reported. And weak. David exchanged glances with the others. Rapid, weak pulse combined with dizziness and cold extremities were classic signs of shock. Emma's body was beginning to shut down non-essential functions to preserve blood flow to vital organs. We have a decision to make, David said quietly to the group. Emma's showing signs of shock. If her condition continues to deteriorate, we could lose her even if rescue arrives. The weight of that statement settled over the four friends like a heavy blanket. They were facing the possibility that their adventure had just become a recovery operation instead of a rescue. What are our options? Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she was afraid to hear the answer. David looked down into the crevice where Emma was trapped, then back at his friends. We try to stabilize her condition as much as possible and hope rescue gets here in time. Or what? Marcus demanded. David took a deep breath. or we try something drastic to get her out ourselves. Like what Jake asked, though his construction experience was already suggesting possibilities he didn't want to consider. We try to move the rock that's pinning her, David said quietly. You just said that was impossible, Sarah protested. Not impossible, Jake corrected grimly. Just extremely dangerous. If we try to move that boulder and we lose control of it, we could crush Emma completely. We could kill her trying to save her. The group fell silent as the full weight of their situation became clear. They could wait for professional rescue and hope Emma's condition didn't deteriorate beyond the point of survival, or they could attempt their own rescue operation with improvised equipment and limited knowledge, risking Emma's life in the process. From deep within the rocks, Emma's voice drifted up to them, weaker now but still determined. Whatever you're going to do, you better decide fast. I don't think I can hold on much longer. The decision they made in the next few minutes would determine whether 5 friends went home together, or whether someone would be left behind in Devil's Canyon forever. The next 10 minutes stretched like hours, as 4 friends grappled with a decision that no one should ever have to make. Every second that passed brought Emma closer to irreversible medical crisis, but a wrong move in their rescue attempt could kill her instantly. David had positioned himself where he could maintain medical communication with Emma while monitoring her condition. Emma, I need you to stay with me. Keep talking to me. Tell me about your pain level. Any changes in sensation? Anything at all? The pain comes in waves, Emma replied, her voice noticeably weaker than it had been even 10 minutes earlier. Sometimes it's like fire shooting up my leg, and sometimes I can't feel anything at all. I'm cold, David. Really cold. The progression of symptoms painted a clear picture of deteriorating circulation and advancing shock. David knew that Emma's body was beginning to shut down peripheral blood flow to preserve vital organs, a last-ditch survival mechanism that bought time, but couldn't last indefinitely. Jake was circling the boulder formation, studying it from every angle with the systematic approach of someone who understood leverage, weight distribution, and structural mechanics. The main boulder is wedged at an angle, he reported to the group. If we could lift it just 2 or 3 inches, it might shift enough to free her leg. How, Sarah asked, though she was already unpacking rope from her emergency kit. We need to create a fulcrum system, Jake explained, his mind working through the physics of their situation. Find a solid pivot point, use our longest rope as a lever arm, and apply force at the maximum mechanical advantage. Marcus was documenting everything with his camera, not out of morbid curiosity, but because he understood they might need evidence of their decision-making process. If this went wrong, what are the risks, he asked. Jake's answer was brutally honest. If we lose control of the boulder while we're lifting it, the full weight could come down on Emma. Instead of having a crushed leg, we could crush her entire body. What if we don't try, Sarah asked quietly. David answered that question with medical precision that made the words even more chilling. Based on her symptoms, Emma's going into progressive shock. Crushed tissue releases toxins into the bloodstream. Even if rescue gets here in the next few hours, she could go into cardiac arrest or organ failure. The silence that followed was broken by Emma's voice from the rocks, and this time they could hear her fighting to stay conscious. I heard what you said. I know you're talking about whether to try moving the rock. Emma. David started to speak, but she cut him off. No, listen to me. I can feel myself getting weaker. I don't think I have hours to wait for rescue, her voice strengthened with determination. If you think you can get me out, I want you to try. Marcus felt tears threatening and forced them back. Emma, if this goes wrong, if you don't try, I die anyway, Emma replied with stark clarity. I'd rather die because my friends tried everything to save me than die because they were too afraid to take a risk. The weight of her words settled over the group like a physical force. Emma was asking them to risk her life to save her life, and she was asking them to live with the consequences either way. Sarah made the first move toward a decision. What do we need to do? Jake was already visualizing the mechanics of their improvised rescue system. We need to find a solid anchor point for our fulcrum. Then we rig our rope to create the longest possible lever arm. We'll need at least 3 people to generate enough force, and 1 person to guide Emma out the second the boulder shifts. I'll guide Emma. David volunteered immediately. If something goes wrong medically during the extraction, I need to be right there. That's dangerous, Marcus protested. If we lose control of the boulder, then I'll be in the same position Emma's in now, David finished. It's a risk I'm willing to take. Sarah was studying their rope supplies and calculating lengths. We have 150 feet of climbing rope, plus the shorter utility ropes. That should give us enough mechanical advantage if we can find the right fulcrum point. Jake was examining potential anchor points among the surrounding boulders. There, he said, pointing to a massive rock formation, about 20 feet from Emma's position. That boulder has to weigh at least 10,000 pounds. It's not going anywhere, and it's positioned where we can get good leverage. The physics of their plan were theoretically sound, but the margin for error was terrifyingly small. They would be attempting to control thousands of pounds of force with improvised equipment and no safety backup. Wait, Marcus said suddenly. What if we don't try to lift the whole boulder? What if we try to break off just the piece that's pinning Emma's leg? Jake considered this option, studying the boulder's structure. It's possible, but rock fracturing is unpredictable. We could break off a piece that's even heavier and lands in an even worse position. Or we could break off the exact piece we need and free her completely, Sarah added. They were discussing options that all carried enormous risk. There were no safe choices left, only different ways to potentially save Emma's life or accidentally end it. Emma's voice interrupted their debate, and this time she sounded frightened. Guys, I'm having trouble staying awake. Everything's getting fuzzy. David's medical alarm bells were screaming. Loss of consciousness in a shock patient was a dire sign that indicated her body's systems were beginning to fail. Emma, I need you to fight to stay awake. Focus on my voice. Tell me about your last vacation. Tell me about anything. Just keep talking. We went to that beach in Oregon, Emma mumbled, her words slurring slightly. The water was so cold, but the sunset was beautiful. Marcus took those amazing photos. That's right, Marcus encouraged, his voice breaking slightly. Keep talking about the beach. Emma, what else do you remember? But Emma's responses were becoming slower and less coherent. They were running out of time, and everyone knew it. We have to decide now, David said firmly. Her condition is deteriorating too fast to wait any longer. Sarah looked around the group, meeting each person's eyes. Are we all in agreement? We try to move the boulder. Jake nodded grimly. It's our best option. Marcus wiped tears from his eyes and nodded. Let's bring Emma home. David was already moving toward the crevice where Emma was trapped. I'm going down there with her. If this works, I need to be ready to treat her injuries immediately. If it doesn't work, he didn't finish the sentence. David, Sarah said, grabbing his arm. If something goes wrong, if we lose control of that boulder, you could both. I know, David replied, but I became a paramedic to save lives, not to watch people die, because I was too afraid to take risks. Emma would do the same for any of us. The four friends spent the next 20 minutes setting up their improvised rescue system. Jake engineered a fulcrum using a smaller boulder wedged against the massive anchor rock. Sarah rigged their ropes to create a compound pulley system that would multiply their pulling force. Marcus positioned himself where he could document the attempt and serve as a safety spotter. David carefully lowered himself into the crevice with Emma, carrying their first aid supplies and emergency bivouac gear. What he found when he reached her position was worse than he had feared. Emma was barely conscious, her skin pale and cold to the touch. Her pulse was rapid and thready. Her trapped leg was swollen and discolored, clearly suffering from severe circulation compromise. Most alarming, she was having difficulty maintaining awareness of her surroundings. Emma, can you hear me? David asked, checking her pupils and vital signs. Emma's voice was weak and confused. What's happening? Where are we? The confusion and disorientation were signs that Emma's brain wasn't getting adequate oxygen, a late-stage symptom of severe shock that indicated they had very little time left. We're going to get you out of here, David told her, though he wasn't sure she could understand him anymore. Your friends are going to move the rock, and I'm going to pull you free. But I need you to help me. When I tell you to, you need to try to pull yourself backward with your arms. Emma nodded weakly, but David wasn't sure she had processed what he was telling her. From above, Jake's voice echoed down into the crevice. David, are you ready? We're about to start applying pressure to the lever system. David positioned himself where he could grab Emma and pull her backward the instant the boulder shifted. Ready, he called back. Emma, David said urgently, gripping her shoulders. When I say now, you pull yourself backward as hard as you can. Do you understand? Emma's eyes focused on his face with great effort. I understand, she whispered. From above, they could hear Jake coordinating the rescue attempt. Sarah, Marcus, on my count. Remember, smooth and steady pressure. If we feel the boulder starting to slip, we let go immediately and get clear. David felt his heart pounding as he realized they were about to either save Emma's life or watch her die. There was no middle ground, no partial success. In the next 60 seconds, everything would change. 1, 2, 3, pull. The sound of straining rope and shifting rock filled the canyon as three friends put everything they had into the desperate attempt to save the four. The first sound was the groan of rope under tremendous tension, followed by the deep grinding noise of 1,000-pound rocks shifting against each other. For a moment that felt like eternity, nothing seemed to happen. Then, with a sound like thunder, the massive boulder moved. It's working, Jake shouted from above. The rock is lifting. David, can you see any clearance? David was watching the gap around Emma's trapped leg with laser focus. Not yet. Keep pulling. The three friends above were straining against their improvised lever system with everything they had. Sarah's muscles burned as she threw her entire body weight into the rope. Marcus gritted his teeth and pulled until his hands bled from the rope friction. Jake used his construction-hardened strength to coordinate their efforts while maintaining leverage. More, David called from below. I need another inch. The boulder shifted again, this time with a grinding sound that suggested the entire rock formation was being stressed beyond its normal limits. Other rocks in the area began to creak and settle as the weight distribution changed. The whole formation is destabilizing, Jake warned. We can't hold this much longer. David could see a sliver of space opening around Emma's trapped leg, but it wasn't enough. Emma, can you try to pull your leg toward your body? Try to compress your thigh muscle. Emma was barely conscious, but some part of her understood the urgency in David's voice. She made a weak attempt to pull her leg free, but the movement caused her to cry out in pain. I can't, she gasped. It's stuck on something. David reached down into the narrow gap, feeling around Emma's trapped leg. His fingers found the problem. A sharp projection of rock was hooked behind her knee, preventing her leg from sliding free, even when the main weight was lifted. There's a rock spur holding her leg, David shouted to the others. I need to try to break it off. How long do you need? Jake called back, strain evident in his voice. David was feeling around the rock projection, trying to assess whether it could be broken by hand. Give me 30 seconds. We can't hold this for 30 seconds, Sarah warned. The rope is starting to fray. David made a desperate decision. Using a small rock as a hammer, he began striking the projection that was holding Emma's leg. Each impact sent vibrations through the rock formation, further destabilizing their precarious rescue system. David, whatever you're doing, hurry, Marcus yelled. I can see the anchor rope starting to slip. The projection of rock was harder than David had hoped. Each strike with his improvised hammer sent shockwaves of pain through Emma's already traumatized leg, but the rock stubbornly refused to break. I'm sorry, Emma, David muttered as he struck harder. I'm so sorry. Emma was drifting in and out of consciousness, but the impacts were bringing her back to awareness with waves of agony. Just get me out, she whispered through gritted teeth. Don't stop. Above them, the rescue system was beginning to fail. The rope was fraying where it passed over the sharp edge of their fulcrum rock. Sarah could see individual fibers breaking with each surge of tension. Jake, the rope won't hold much longer, Sarah warned. Almost got it, David called from below. He had switched tactics, using his multi-tool to try to chip away at the rock projection, rather than breaking it off completely. Then, with a sharp crack that echoed through the canyon, the rock projection finally broke free. It's clear, David shouted. Emma, try to pull your leg out now. But Emma was unconscious again, her body limp in David's arms. David would have to extract her leg himself, while maintaining his own precarious position in the narrow crevice. She's unconscious, David reported. I'm going to try to pull her free. David positioned himself to get maximum leverage and began pulling Emma's leg from the gap. The movement caused fresh bleeding from the crushing injuries, but he could feel her leg sliding free. Got it, David yelled. Her leg is free. Let the boulder down slowly. But slowly wasn't an option. The frayed rope chose that moment to snap completely. The massive boulder crashed back into position with a sound like an explosion. Rock fragments showered down into the crevice, where David was shielding Emma's unconscious form with his own body. David, Sarah screamed, "Are you okay?" For several terrifying seconds, there was no response from the crevice. Dust and debris filled the air, making it impossible to see what had happened below. Then David's voice emerged from the settling dust, shaky but strong. "We're okay. Emma's free, but we need to get her out of here now." The extraction of Emma and David from the crevice required another improvised rescue system, but this one was simpler. They rigged a rope harness to lift Emma's unconscious form to the surface, followed by David. When Emma finally lay on solid ground beside the boulder field, the full extent of her injuries became visible. Her right leg was badly crushed, clearly fractured in multiple places. The skin was torn and bleeding, already showing signs of severe swelling. But she was breathing, her pulse was detectable, and most importantly, she was alive. "Her leg is definitely broken," David reported, as he began emergency treatment. "Multiple fractures, probable nerve damage, significant tissue damage. But we got her out before we lost her completely." Sarah was already on her radio again, trying to establish contact with emergency services, now that they were back on higher ground. "I'm getting a weak signal," she reported. "I might be able to get through if I can get to that ridge." "Go," Jake said immediately. "Marcus and I will help David stabilize Emma for transport." "How long before we can expect rescue?" David asked, checking Emma's vital sign. Sarah was studying her map and calculating distances. "If I can get through to emergency services, and if they can get a helicopter in here, maybe 2 hours. If they have to send a ground team, we're looking at 6 to 8 hours minimum." Emma's condition might not allow for that kind of delay. David was already implementing emergency stabilization procedures, using their first aid supplies to immobilize her leg and treat her for shock. "I can keep her stable for a few hours," David assessed grimly. "But she needs surgery and blood replacement therapy. The longer we wait, the higher the risk of complications." Sarah took off at a knee run toward the ridge line, carrying her radio and GPS. She had never moved so fast over such difficult terrain, driven by the knowledge that Emma's life depended on her ability to establish communication with the outside world. Marcus and Jake worked with David to create an emergency bivouac around Emma, using their emergency shelter to protect her from the cold mountain air, and their sleeping bags to treat her for hypothermia. "Is she going to make it?" Marcus asked quietly, watching Emma's pale, unconscious face. David was honest with his assessment. "She's stable for now, but she's lost a lot of blood, and she's been in shock for several hours. The next few hours are critical." As if responding to their conversation, Emma's eyes fluttered open. "Did you get me out?" she whispered. "We got you out," David confirmed, relief flooding his voice. "You're free, Emma. You're going to be okay." Emma tried to sit up but was too weak. "My leg." "Your leg is injured, but it's going to heal," David told her, though he wasn't certain that was true. "Right now, I need you to rest and let us take care of you." "I knew you wouldn't leave me," Emma said softly. "I knew you'd find a way." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "We're friends, Emma. Friends don't leave friends behind." Sarah had never pushed herself so hard in her life. The ridge line that would give her radio access to emergency services was over a mile away through some of the most challenging terrain in Devil's Canyon. Every minute she spent climbing toward that ridge was another minute that Emma's condition could deteriorate. The route to the ridge required scrambling over loose rock, navigating around cliff faces, and climbing nearly 800 feet of elevation gain. Under normal circumstances, it would be a challenging but manageable climb for an experienced hiker. But these weren't normal circumstances. Sarah was climbing with the weight of her friend's life on her shoulders, driven by a desperation that made her take risks she would never normally consider. Halfway to the ridge, Sarah's radio crackled with static. She stopped immediately and tried to establish contact. Emergency services. This is Sarah Rodriguez with a hiking party in Devil's Canyon. We have a medical emergency. Do you copy? Static. Sarah climbed higher, trying different frequencies and power setting. Every few minutes, she would stop and attempt to establish contact, but the canyon walls continued to block her signal. Meanwhile, back at the rescue site, David was fighting to keep Emma stable. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, and her pulse was becoming increasingly irregular. The massive blood loss from her crushed leg, combined with several hours of shock, was pushing her body to its limits. Emma, I need you to stay awake, David insisted, gently tapping her face when her eyes began to close. Keep talking to me. Tell me about your students. Emma's job as a teacher had always been a source of strength for her, and David hoped that focusing on something positive might help her maintain consciousness. My kids, Emma whispered weakly. They are doing a science project on geology. They would love to see this place. What kind of geology project? David encouraged, while checking her pulse and monitoring her breathing. Rock formations, Emma replied, her voice barely audible. How mountains are made. I told them about this hike. They made me promise to bring back pictures. Marcus was listening to this conversation while documenting their situation with his camera. The irony wasn't lost on him. Emma had wanted to share the beauty of Devil's Canyon with her students, but instead the canyon had nearly claimed her life. Jake was maintaining their improvised shelter while keeping watch for any signs of approaching rescue aircraft. The clear weather that had made their hike possible was now working in their favor for helicopter rescue. But first Sarah had to establish contact. How long has Sarah been gone? Marcus asked, checking his watch. 45 minutes, David replied. It should take her at least another 30 minutes to reach the ridge, assuming she doesn't run into any technical climbing problems. Emma's condition was becoming increasingly critical. Her skin was cold and clammy, her breathing was shallow and rapid, and she was having difficulty maintaining consciousness. David was using all of his paramedic training to keep her stable, but they were approaching the limits of what field medicine could accomplish. David, Emma said suddenly, her voice clearer than it had been in hours. If I don't make it, I want you to tell my family that I wasn't afraid. Tell them I knew my friends were doing everything they could to save me. You're going to tell them yourself, David replied firmly. You're not giving up now. We didn't risk everything to get you out of those rocks, just to lose you to shock. But privately, David was deeply concerned. Emma's sudden clarity of thought could be a positive sign of recovery, or it could be the temporary improvement that sometimes occurs just before a patient's condition deteriorates irreversibly. High above them on the ridge line, Sarah was finally getting stronger radio signal. She had climbed above most of the canyon walls, and her radio was beginning to pick up emergency services frequencies. Emergency services, emergency services. This is Sarah Rodriguez with a hiking emergency in Devil's Canyon. We have a critically injured hiker who needs immediate helicopter evacuation. Do you copy? This time, a voice crackled back through the static. This is Eagle County Emergency Services. We copy your transmission, but your signal is weak. Please repeat your location and nature of emergency. Sarah felt a surge of relief so powerful, it nearly brought her to tears. We are in Devil's Canyon, approximately 12 miles from the main trailhead. We have a 26-year-old female with severe crushing injuries to her right leg, multiple fractures, significant blood loss, and symptoms of shock. She needs immediate medical evacuation. Copy, Devil's Canyon. Can you provide exact GPS coordinates? Sarah read off their location from her GPS unit, repeating the coordinates twice to ensure accuracy. We copy your coordinates. Weather conditions are favorable for helicopter rescue. Estimated time of arrival is 90 minutes. Can you mark your location for visual identification? Affirmative. We have emergency flares and reflective materials. Copy. Advise on current condition of injured party. Sarah had to be honest about Emma's condition. Patient has been injured for approximately 4 hours. She's conscious but weak, showing signs of severe shock and blood loss. Our medically trained team member is providing field stabilization, but she needs advanced medical care immediately. Understood. Helicopter rescue team is launching now. continue providing emergency care, and prepare landing zone if possible. Sarah felt overwhelming relief, but she knew they weren't out of danger yet. 90 minutes was a long time for someone in Emma's condition, and they still had to get her to a location where a helicopter could safely land. Emergency services, be advised that our location is in a boulder field. We may need to move patient to a suitable landing zone. Copy. Our pilot will assess landing options on arrival. If helicopter landing is not possible, we'll deploy rescue personnel via winch system. Sarah began the treacherous climb back down to her friends, moving as quickly as safety would allow. Emma needed to know that help was coming, and the team needed to prepare for helicopter evacuation. When Sarah arrived back at their emergency camp, she found Emma conscious but clearly deteriorating. David had used most of their medical supplies, treating her injuries and shock symptoms. "Help is coming," Sarah announced breathlessly. Helicopter rescue. 90 minutes out. The news brought visible relief to the entire group, but David remained focused on the medical reality of their situation. 90 minutes is a long time, David said quietly to Sarah. Her condition is getting worse. Blood pressure is dropping, pulse is getting weaker. I'm not sure she can hold on that long. Emma overheard this assessment, and her response surprised everyone. "Then we better make sure I do hold on," she said with determination that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her physical condition. "I didn't survive being crushed by a boulder just to give up before the helicopter gets here." Her words galvanized the group. Marcus began preparing emergency flares to mark their location. Jake started clearing the best possible landing zone in the boulder field. Sarah broke out their emergency reflective blankets to create visual signals for the rescue aircraft. David continued monitoring Emma's vital signs while providing encouragement and medical care. "You're tough, Emma, tougher than any of us realized. Just keep fighting for 90 more minutes." "I can do 90 minutes," Emma replied, though her voice was weak. "I teach middle school kids. 90 minutes is nothing compared to a typical Tuesday afternoon." Despite everything they had been through, Emma's joke made them all smile. It was a reminder of who she was underneath the medical emergency, a strong, optimistic person who could find humor even in the darkest situations. But as the minutes ticked by, it became clear that the next hour and a half would test every bit of Emma's strength and her friends' ability to keep her alive until professional help arrived. Time moves differently during a medical emergency. Seconds stretch into minutes, and minutes feel like hours when you're watching someone you care about fight for their life. For the four friends waiting in Devil's Canyon, the 90 minutes until helicopter rescue arrived would be the longest hour and a half of their lives. David had established a routine of checking Emma's vital signs every 5 minutes, documenting her condition, and adjusting their treatment protocols based on her changing symptoms. What he found during these checks was deeply concerning. Emma's condition was slowly but steadily deteriorating. "Blood pressure is dropping," David reported quietly to the others. "Pulse is getting more irregular. Her body is having trouble maintaining circulation." The medical reality was stark. Emma had lost significant blood from her crushing injuries, and her body had been fighting shock for several hours. Even with field treatment, she was approaching the limits of what her cardiovascular system could handle. "What can we do?" Marcus asked, feeling helpless as he watched his friend struggle. "Keep her warm, keep her talking, and pray that helicopter gets here before her condition becomes irreversible," David replied honestly. Jake had been working steadily to improve their landing zone, moving rocks and clearing debris from the flattest area they could find in the boulder field. It wasn't ideal. The space was small and surrounded by massive rocks that would make helicopter maneuvering challenging. But it was the best option available. "The landing zone is as good as I can make it," Jake reported. "It's tight, but an experienced pilot should be able to get in here." Sarah was monitoring their radio communications, maintaining periodic contact with emergency services, and providing updates on Emma's condition. Each conversation carried the same underlying tension: help was coming, but would it arrive in time? "Emergency services, this is Sarah Rodriguez with an update on our injured hiker." Sarah spoke into her radio. "Go ahead with your update. Patient remains conscious, but shows continued signs of deteriorating shock. Blood pressure low, pulse irregular and weak. Our medic is providing field stabilization, but patient needs immediate advanced care. Copy your update. Rescue helicopter is en route. Estimated arrival in 60 minutes. Continue current treatment protocols. 60 minutes. David ran calculations in his head, comparing Emma's rate of deterioration with the time remaining until rescue. The numbers were uncomfortably close. Emma was drifting in and out of consciousness more frequently now, her body conserving energy by shutting down non-essential function. When she was awake, she was increasingly confused and disoriented, signs that her brain wasn't getting adequate oxygen. Emma, David said gently, I need you to try to stay awake. Focus on my voice. Tell me about your favorite place in the world. Emma's eyes fluttered open, and it took her several seconds to focus on David's face. My grandmother's garden, she whispered. In Oregon, she grew the most beautiful roses. Tell me about the roses, David encouraged, checking her pulse while she talked. Pink ones and white ones, Emma continued, her voice dreamy and distant. She taught me their names, peace roses and hybrid teas, and climbers that went up the side of her house. The fact that Emma could still access detailed memories was encouraging, but her increasing difficulty staying awake was alarming. Marcus was documenting everything with his camera, but now his motivation was different than it had been during their hike. He was creating a record of their rescue efforts, evidence of how hard they had fought to save Emma's life. Why are you still taking pictures? Jake asked. Because if Emma doesn't make it, Marcus replied quietly, her family is going to want to know that we did everything possible. And if she does make it, she's going to want to see how brave she was. The sound of their conversation seemed to penetrate Emma's consciousness. I'm going to make it, she said, with surprising clarity. I have to make it. My kids are depending on me to come back and show them those geology pictures. Her determination was inspiring, but David could see that her body was approaching its limits. Her skin was cold and gray, her breathing was becoming more labored, and her pulse was increasingly difficult to detect. 45 minutes until rescue. Emergency services. This is Sarah Rodriguez. Patient condition is critical. Is there any way to expedite helicopter arrival? Negative. Rodriguez. Aircraft is flying at maximum safe speed for condition. Maintain current care protocols and prepare for immediate evacuation upon arrival. Sarah wanted to scream into the radio that maintain current care protocols wasn't enough, that Emma was dying despite their best efforts, that they needed help now. But she understood that the rescue team was doing everything they could. David made a difficult decision. Emma's condition was deteriorating to the point where conventional field treatment wasn't enough. He needed to take more aggressive measures to keep her alive until the helicopter arrived. I'm going to start CPR compression cycles, David announced to the group. Not full CPR. She still has a pulse, but chest compressions to help her heart maintain circulation. It was a risky decision. Chest compressions on a conscious patient could cause additional injuries, and they were typically reserved for patients in cardiac arrest. But Emma's pulse was so weak that David felt he needed to manually assist her cardiovascular system. Will that hurt her? Marcus asked. Probably, David admitted. But at this point, the risk of not doing it is greater than the risk of doing. David began gentle chest compression, manually helping Emma's heart pump blood to her vital organs. The technique was exhausting and required constant attention, but it seemed to help stabilize her condition. 30 minutes until rescue. Emma's consciousness was becoming increasingly sporadic. She would be aware and responsive for a few minutes, then drift away for longer periods. During her conscious moments, she seemed to understand the gravity of her situation. David, she said during one of her lucid periods, I need you to promise me something. I'm not making any promises about giving up, David replied firmly. You're going to make it through this. Promise me that if I don't make it, you won't blame yourselves, Emma continued. This was an accident. You guys saved my life by getting me out of those rocks. If something happens now, it's not your fault. The words hit the group like a physical blow. They had been so focused on the mechanics of keeping Emma alive that they hadn't fully processed the emotional weight of what they were experiencing. Nothing's going to happen, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. You're going to be fine. We're all going to be fine. but Emma's request forced them to confront the possibility that their rescue attempt might not be enough. They had successfully extracted her from the boulder trap, but her injuries might still prove fatal. Jake, who had been quietly working on improving their landing zone, stopped what he was doing and came over to Emma's side. "Emma, you remember when we all climbed Mount Whitney together, and you were the only one who made it to the summit?" Emma smiled weakly. "You all turned back because of the weather." "We turned back because we were scared," Jake admitted. "But you kept going. You're the strongest person I know. Emma, you're stronger than some stupid rocks, and you're stronger than whatever your body is going through right now." Marcus knelt down beside Emma's improvised stretcher. "And remember when we got lost in that slot canyon in Utah, and you were the one who figured out how to read the terrain and get us back to the trail?" "That was different," Emma whispered. "No, it wasn't," Marcus insisted. "You've always been the one who doesn't give up. You've always been the one who finds a way through impossible situations. This is just another impossible situation, and you're going to find a way through it." Sarah joined the others around Emma's stretcher. "We've been friends for 6 years, and in all that time, I've never seen you quit anything. Not a difficult hike, not a challenging class, not anything. You don't get to start quitting now." The emotional support seemed to help Emma maintain consciousness and focus. She squeezed each of her friend's hands weakly but deliberately. "I won't quit," she promised. "But you have to promise me something too. If something happens to me, you have to keep hiking together. Don't let this ruin the mountains for you. Don't let this ruin your friendship." 20 minutes until rescue. In the distance, they could hear the faint sound of helicopter rotors approaching. The sound grew gradually stronger, and David felt Emma's pulse strengthen slightly, as if the approaching rescue was giving her body renewed determination to survive. "That's our ride," David told Emma. "Just hold on for 20 more minutes. Just keep fighting for 20 more minutes." Emma's eyes focused on David's face with more clarity than she had shown in over an hour. 20 minutes, she repeated. "I can do 20 minutes. But as the helicopter sound grew louder, David realized they faced one final challenge. Getting Emma from their current position to the landing zone would require moving her over rough terrain. In her condition, even that short transport could be enough to trigger complete cardiovascular collapse. They were so close to rescue, but the last few minutes might prove to be the most dangerous of all. The sound of helicopter rotors echoing off the canyon walls was the most beautiful sound any of them had ever heard. After more than 5 hours of fighting, to keep Emma alive with improvised equipment and field medicine, professional help was finally arriving. But as the rescue helicopter approached their position, it became clear that the final phase of Emma's rescue would present its own unique challenges. "Sarah, this is Flight for Life Rescue Helicopter. We have you in visual contact, but your landing zone is extremely tight. We're going to need to assess whether we can safely land, or if we need to deploy rescue personnel by winch." Sarah grabbed her radio immediately. "Flight for Life, our patient is in critical condition. She's been in shock for over 5 hours and needs immediate medical intervention." "Copy. Understood. Stand by while our pilot assesses landing options." The helicopter circled their position twice, the pilot carefully studying the improvised landing zone that Jake had cleared among the massive boulders. From the ground, the four friends watched anxiously as the aircraft maneuvered between the towering rock formations. "That's a hell of a tight squeeze," Jake observed, watching the helicopter navigate between rocks that left only a few feet of clearance on either side. David was monitoring Emma's vital signs while listening to the helicopter communications. "Her pulse is getting weaker," he reported grimly. "Whatever they're going to do, they need to do it fast." The helicopter pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "Sarah, we cannot safely land in your current location. The rock formations present too much rotor hazard. We're going to deploy our medical team by winch system. Can you prepare patient for vertical evacuation?" "Affirmative," Sarah replied, though she looked at David with concern. Moving Emma from their current position to a winch pickup point would require carrying her across rough terrain. "Flight for Life, be advised our patient has possible spinal injuries and multiple fractures. She needs full immobilization for transport." "Copy. Our team is deploying now with full spine board and medical equipment. The helicopter moved into position directly overhead, and two rescue personnel began rappelling down into the boulder field. The lead medic carried a full medical kit and rescue equipment, while the second rescuer brought a specialized evacuation stretcher designed for winch operation. David watched the rescue medics descend and felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Help was finally here, but Emma's condition had deteriorated so significantly that he wasn't sure if professional intervention would be enough. The lead flight medic, a woman named Jennifer Hayes, with 15 years of experience in mountain rescue, quickly assessed the situation when she reached the ground. "I'm Jennifer, flight medic," she announced efficiently. "What's our patient's status?" David quickly briefed her on Emma's condition and the treatment they had provided. 26-year-old female, crushing injuries to right leg with multiple fractures, significant blood loss, shock symptoms for approximately 5 hours, pulses weak and irregular, blood pressure critically low, periods of unconsciousness increasing in frequency. Jennifer immediately began her own assessment, while her partner prepared the evacuation equipment. "Good work on the field stabilization," she told David. "You probably saved her life with those interventions." But as Jennifer worked, her expression became increasingly grave. "Her condition is critical," she reported to the helicopter. "We need to get her to a trauma center immediately. Prep the aircraft for emergency transport." The process of preparing Emma for winch evacuation required extreme care. Every movement could potentially worsen her injuries or trigger cardiovascular collapse. Jennifer and her partner worked quickly but methodically to immobilize Emma's spine and prepare her for vertical transport. Jennifer said, speaking directly to her patient, "I'm Jennifer from Flight for Life. We're going to get you out of here and to a hospital. I need you to stay as still as possible while we move you." Emma's eyes fluttered open, and she managed a weak nod. "My friends," she whispered. "Are my friends okay?" "Your friends are fine," Jennifer assured her. "They did an incredible job taking care of you. Now it's our turn." The evacuation stretcher was a marvel of engineering, designed to protect patients during vertical transport while providing full medical access for continued treatment. Emma was carefully secured to the stretcher with multiple straps and immobilization devices. "We're ready for pickup," Jennifer radioed to the helicopter. The winch system engaged with a mechanical whining sound, and Emma began her slow ascent toward the helicopter. David watched his friend disappear into the aircraft, feeling a mixture of relief and helplessness. "Is she going to make it?" Marcus asked Jennifer, as she prepared for her own winch pickup. Jennifer's answer was honest but not encouraging. "The next few hours are critical. She's lost a lot of blood, and her body has been fighting shock for a long time. But she's young, she's strong, and she's getting the best medical care available." As Jennifer was winched up to the helicopter, the aircraft pilot radioed down to the remaining 4 friends. "We're transporting your friend to Denver General Hospital Trauma Center. You can meet her there, but it's going to be several hours before you can get out of the canyon." The helicopter departed with a thunderous roar of rotors, leaving the 4 friends alone in Devil's Canyon for the first time since Emma's accident. The sudden silence was almost overwhelming. "She's going to make it," Sarah said, though her voice suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as the others. David was reviewing everything they had done, analyzing their decisions and treatment protocols. "We did everything right," he said finally. "Given the circumstances, we couldn't have done anything differently." Jake was looking at the boulder formation where Emma had been trapped just hours earlier. "I can't believe we got her out of there." Marcus was reviewing the photos he had taken throughout the rescue, documentation of their desperate struggle to save their friend. "We need to get back to the trailhead," he said practically. "Emma's going to want to see us when she wakes up." The hike back to their vehicle would take 4 hours during which Emma would be fighting for her life in a Denver trauma center. It was going to be the longest 4 hours of their lives. As they packed up their emergency camp and prepared for the trek back to civilization, each of them was processing what they had experienced. They had faced impossible choices, risked everything to save their friend, and discovered reserves of strength and determination they didn't know they possessed. But most importantly, they had refused to give up. When faced with a situation that could have easily justified abandoning hope. They had fought for every minute, every breath, every heartbeat that might give Emma a chance to survive. Whatever happened, Sarah said, as they began their hike toward the trailhead, we gave her the best chance we could. It was true, but it didn't make the uncertainty any easier to bear. Emma's fate was now in the hands of trauma surgeons and emergency room doctors, and all her friends could do was wait and hope that their desperate rescue effort had been enough. The drive from Devil's Canyon to Denver General Hospital was a blur of highway miles and anxious silence. Marcus drove, while the others tried unsuccessfully to process what they had experienced. Every few minutes, someone would call the hospital for updates on Emma's condition, only to be told that information was limited to family members. "We are her family," Sarah had argued during one of these calls. "We're the closest thing she has to family." But hospital protocols were clear, and without being blood relatives or emergency contacts, they were left to wait and worry, without official updates on their friend's condition. They reached the hospital at 11:30 p.m., more than 12 hours after Emma's accident. The emergency room was a harsh contrast to the natural beauty of Devil's Canyon's sterile, fluorescent lighting. The smell of disinfectant and the constant background noise of medical equipment and urgent conversations. "We're here about Emma Walsh," David told the nurse at the emergency room desk. "She was brought in by Flight for Life helicopter from Devil's Canyon." The nurse checked her computer system. "MS. Walsh is currently in surgery. I can't provide details about her condition, but I can tell you that her surgical team has been working on her for several hours." Several hours. The words hit the four friends like a physical blow. Surgery that lasted several hours suggested extensive injuries and complicated procedures. "Is there a waiting area where we can stay?" Jake asked. The nurse directed them to the surgical waiting room, a cheerless space filled with uncomfortable chairs and outdated magazines. It was nearly empty at this hour, which somehow made their vigil feel even more isolated and lonely. David found himself analyzing every sound from the surgical wing, trying to interpret the significance of footsteps, conversations, and medical equipment. His paramedic training made him acutely aware of the medical battle being fought on Emma's behalf, just a few rooms away. Surgery that takes this long could mean anything, David told the others. They might be repairing multiple fractures, dealing with internal bleeding, or working on vascular damage. "We just have to wait." Marcus was reviewing the photos from their rescue, creating a timeline of events that might be useful for Emma's medical team. "Look at this," he said, showing the others a photo of Emma's leg immediately after her extraction. "You can see the extent of the crushing damage. It's amazing she survived the initial injury." Sarah had been making phone calls, notifying Emma's school, contacting her emergency contacts, and dealing with the practical logistics of their situation. "I reached Emma's aunt in Portland," she reported. "She's flying out first thing in the morning." Jake was thinking through their rescue operation, second-guessing decisions, and wondering if they could have done anything differently. "Do you think we waited too long to try moving the boulder?" he asked David. "No," David replied firmly. "Any earlier, and we wouldn't have had a proper rescue plan. Any later, and Emma might have lost consciousness permanently before we could extract her." At 2:15 a.m., a surgeon in scrubs emerged from the surgical wing and approached their group. Dr. Michael Chen looked exhausted but determined as he introduced himself. "Are you the friends who were with Emma Walsh during her accident?" "Yes," they replied almost in unison. Dr. Chen sat down across from them, his expression serious but not hopeless. "Emma is alive, and she's stable, but I want to be honest with you about the severity of her injuries." The surgeon explained that Emma had suffered multiple compound fractures in her right leg, severe tissue damage, and significant blood loss that had put her into life-threatening shock. The surgical team had spent 6 hours repairing bone fracture, reconstructing damaged blood vessels, and removing crushed tissue. "The good news is that we were able to save her leg," Dr. Chen continued. "There was significant concern about amputation, but the blood flow has been restored and the fractures are stabilized." "What's the bad news?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the answer. "Emma lost a significant amount of blood, and her body was in shock for several hours." that puts stress on all her organ systems. The next 48 hours will be critical for determining if there are any lasting complications. Dr. Chen went on to explain that Emma would require several more surgeries over the coming months to fully repair her leg injuries. She would face a long rehabilitation process, and there was no guarantee that she would regain full function in her injured leg. But she's alive, Marcus said, as if testing the reality of those words. She's alive because of the medical care you provided in the field, doctor. Chen replied. The emergency room doctors were impressed by the quality of first aid she received. Without that intervention, she wouldn't have survived the helicopter transport. David felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Can we see her? She's in recovery now, still under anesthesia. She'll be moved to the ICU in a few hours, and you can visit briefly then. But I want you to be prepared. She's on a ventilator. She has multiple Roman IV lines, and she's connected to extensive monitoring equipment. It can be overwhelming to see. The surgeon left them with instructions to check with the ICU nursing staff in a few hours. The four friends settled in for another wait, this time with the knowledge that Emma had survived the immediate crisis, but still faced significant challenges. I can't believe we actually did it, Jake said quietly. We actually saved her life. We all did it, Sarah corrected. Every decision, every action, everything we did worked together to give her a chance. Marcus was thinking about the magnitude of what they had experienced. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd help lift a 1,000-pound boulder to save a friend's life, I would have said they were crazy. People don't know what they're capable of until they are tested, David observed. Today, we found out what we're made of. At 6:30 a.m., nearly 24 hours after Emma's accident, they were finally allowed to visit her in the ICU. The sight of their vibrant, energetic friend surrounded by medical equipment and breathing with the assistance of a ventilator was sober. But Emma was alive. Her vital signs were stable, her color was improving, and the monitors showed steady heart rhythm and blood pressure. The crushing weight of uncertainty that had pressed down on them for hours began to lift slightly. She looked so small, Sarah whispered, approaching Emma's bedside carefully. David checked the monitors with his trained eye. Her numbers are good, he reported quietly. Blood pressure is stable. Heart rate is regular. Her body is responding well to treatment. They were allowed only a brief visit, but it was enough. Emma was fighting, and she was winning. Marcus squeezed Emma's hand gently. We're here, Emma. We're all here, and you're going to be okay. As if responding to his voice, Emma's fingers twitched slightly, the first voluntary movement she had made since the rescue. Did you see that? Jake asked excitedly. She squeezed back. The ICU nurse monitoring Emma's condition smiled. Patients can often hear familiar voices, even when they are sedated. Keep talking to her. It helps with recovery. They took turns sitting with Emma throughout the morning, talking to her about memories from their hiking adventures, plans for future trips, and anything else that might reach through the medical sedation to remind her that she wasn't alone. 36 hours after the accident, Emma began to show signs of emerging from sedation. Her eyes would flutter open for brief moments, and she would make weak attempts to communicate through the ventilator tube. Dr. Chen had been monitoring her progress closely, and he was cautiously optimistic about her recovery. Her vital signs are strong, and there are no signs of organ damage from the extended shock period, he told the group. We're going to try removing the ventilator this afternoon. The process of weaning Emma off the ventilator was gradual and carefully monitored. When the breathing tube was finally removed, her first word was barely a whisper. Friends, we're here, David said immediately, moving to where Emma could see him. We're all here. Emma's eyes moved slowly around the room, taking in the faces of Marcus, Sarah, Jake, and David. Tears began streaming down her face, not from pain, but from relief and gratitude. You saved me, she whispered, her voice hoarse from the ventilator. You actually saved me. You saved yourself, Sarah replied, squeezing Emma's hand. You never gave up. You fought harder than anyone should have to fight. Emma tried to sit up but was too weak. My leg. Dr. Chen answered that question. Your leg is badly injured, but it's going to heal. You'll need several more surgeries and months of rehabilitation, but you're going to walk again. The relief on Emma's face was overwhelming. I was so scared, she admitted. When I was trapped in those rocks, I was terrified that I'd never see you guys again. You don't get rid of us that easily, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Over the next few hours, as Emma became more alert, she began to remember fragments of the rescue. She remembered the sound of the boulder crashing down, the crushing pain, and the terrifying realization that she was trapped. But she also remembered her friends' voices calling to her, David's calm medical instructions, and the feeling of being lifted free from the rocks. I remember you talking to me, Emma told Sarah. Even when I couldn't respond, I could hear you telling me to hold on. We all told you to hold on, Sarah replied. Over and over again. Emma looked around at her four friends, and her expression grew serious. I need you to know something. When I was trapped down there, in those moments when I thought I might die, I wasn't afraid because I knew you were doing everything possible to save me. I've never felt so loved in my entire life. The emotional weight of her words settled over the group. They had known they were fighting to save Emma's life, but they hadn't fully understood how their actions had affected her experience of the crisis. And I need you to know, Emma continued, that what you did up there, moving that boulder, risking your own lives to get me out, that was the most incredible act of friendship I've ever witnessed. You guys are heroes. We're not heroes, Jake protested. We're just friends who couldn't give up on you. That's exactly what makes you heroes, Emma replied firmly. Dr. Chen had been observing this reunion with professional interest. I've been treating trauma patients for 15 years, he told the group, and I can tell you that Emma's positive attitude and rapid recovery are directly related to the emotional support she's receiving. The bond between you five is remarkable. Emma's aunt arrived from Portland that afternoon, and she was overwhelmed by the story of the rescue. Emma has always talked about her hiking friends, she told the group, but I had no idea you were this close. What you did for her, there aren't words for it. As the days passed, Emma's condition continued to improve. The swelling in her leg decreased, her pain became manageable with medication, and her energy levels gradually returned. But the real measure of her recovery was her determination to eventually return to the mountains. I know it's going to be a long time before I can hike again, Emma told her friends during one of their daily visits. But I want you to know that Devil's Canyon didn't win. I'm going to heal, I'm going to get strong, and someday we're going to go hiking together again. Are you sure you want to go back to the mountains? Marcus asked. After what you've been through. Emma's answer surprised them with its certainty. The mountains didn't try to hurt me. Accidents happen everywhere. Cars crash, people fall down stairs, lightning strikes. What happened to me could have happened anywhere. But what also happened is that my best friends risked everything to save my life. That's not something I'm going to let fear take away from me. Her determination was inspiring, but it also highlighted the psychological challenge that all five friends would face in returning to hiking. The experience had changed them in ways they were only beginning to understand. Emma's physical recovery took place over many months, but the emotional recovery for all five friends was an even longer process. The trauma of nearly losing someone they cared about, combined with the stress of making life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure, had affected each of them differently. David found himself second-guessing every medical decision he had made during the rescue. Even though Emma had survived and was recovering well, he repeatedly replayed the scenario in his mind, wondering if he could have done something differently or better. I keep thinking about those moments when her pulse was so weak I could barely detect it, David confided to the group during one of their weekly dinner meetings. What if I hadn't started the chest compression? What if I had missed something important? You saved her life, Sarah reminded him firmly. The surgeon said so himself. Emma is alive because of your medical training and your quick thinking. But David's experience highlighted a common aftermath of traumatic events, the tendency to focus on potential failures rather than actual successes. Marcus had thrown himself into his photography with renewed intensity, but he found himself drawn to images that captured human resilience and survival. His work took on a deeper emotional dimension that reflected his experience of seeing friendship tested under extreme conditions. I used to photograph landscapes because they were beautiful, Marcus explained. Now I photograph them because they remind me that people can survive incredible challenges if they refused to give up. Jake had become almost obsessive about safety planning for any outdoor activity. He researched weather conditions extensively, packed redundant emergency equipment, and insisted on detailed safety briefing for even simple day hikes. "I know I'm being overly cautious," Jake admitted, "but I can't stop thinking about how quickly everything went wrong. One second Emma was fine, and the next second she was trapped under a boulder. I want to be prepared for anything." Sarah had struggled with the memory of her desperate climb to establish radio contact, haunted by the knowledge that Emma's life had depended on her ability to reach emergency services. She had replayed that climb hundreds of times, analyzing every decision and movement. "I keep wondering what would have happened if I hadn't been able to get through." On the radio, Sarah said, "Would we have been able to carry Emma out on our own? Could we have kept her alive long enough to reach help?" These psychological challenges were normal responses to trauma, but they required processing and healing, just like Emma's physical injuries. Emma herself faced the most complex recovery journey. In addition to months of physical therapy, to regain strength and mobility in her injured leg, she had to confront the emotional impact of her near-death experience. "There are moments when I wake up in the middle of the night, and I can still feel those rocks crushing my leg," Emma told the group during one of their hospital visits. "And there are other moments when I feel incredibly grateful for every breath, every heartbeat, every day I get to spend with people I care about." The contrast between trauma and gratitude defined much of Emma's recovery process. She was determined not to let fear control her life, but she also couldn't ignore the reality of what she had experienced. 6 months after the accident, Emma was walking with the assistance of a cane and had regained most of the function in her injured leg. Her doctors were amazed by her progress, crediting her positive attitude and strong support system with contributing to her rapid recovery. Most patients with injuries this severe take much longer to reach this level of mobility, Dr. Chen told Emma during a follow-up appointment. "Your determination to heal has been extraordinary." But Emma credited her recovery to something else entirely. "Having friends who were willing to risk everything to save me gave me a reason to fight," she explained. "I couldn't let their sacrifice be wasted." 8 months after the accident, the 5 friends made a decision that surprised everyone who knew about their experience. They planned another hiking trip. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Emma's aunt asked when she heard about their plans. "I'll never be completely ready," Emma replied honestly. "But I'm tired of letting fear make decisions for me. My friends and I belong in the mountains. What happened to us was terrible, but it also showed us how strong we are when we work together." They chose a much easier trail for their return to hiking, a well-maintained path with no technical challenges and excellent cell phone coverage. But the symbolic importance of the hike was enormous for all of them. "This isn't about conquering our fears," Sarah explained as they prepared for the trip. "This is about reclaiming something that's important to us. The mountains have always been where we feel most like ourselves." The day of their return hike was emotionally charged from the beginning. As they shouldered their packs and headed onto the trail, each of them was remembering their last hiking experience and fighting against the anxiety that came with those memories. Emma moved slowly but steadily, her injured leg requiring frequent rest breaks, but her determination was evident in every step. "How does it feel?" David asked during one of their rest stops. "Scary," Emma admitted, "but also right. This is where I belong, in the mountains with my best friends." Marcus was documenting their return to hiking, but now his photographs captured not just the beauty of the landscape, but the courage required to face their fears. Jake had planned their route with obsessive attention to safety detail, but as the day progressed, he began to relax and remember why he loved hiking in the first place. Sarah found herself appreciating the simple pleasure of walking on a clear trail with good cell phone coverage, no longer taking for granted the basic safety features they had lacked in Devil's Canyon. At the summit of their modest peak, the 5 friends sat together and looked out over the mountains that had nearly cost them their friendship and Emma's life. "I have something to say," Emma announced, pulling out a small notebook. "I've been working on this for months, and I wanted to read it to you guys up here." She opened the notebook and began to read. 8 months ago, in a place called Devil's Canyon, I learned what friendship really means. I learned that true friends don't just share good times and easy adventures. True friends risk everything when someone they care about is in danger. True friends refuse to give up, even when giving up would be easier and safer. When I was trapped beneath those rocks, I thought I was going to die. But I wasn't alone, because I could hear my friends' voices promising that they would find a way to save me. And they did find a way, even though it required them to risk their own lives. What happened to us was terrible, but it was also a gift. It showed us what we're capable of when we refuse to abandon each other. It showed us that love isn't just a feeling, it's a decision to act, even when action is dangerous. I almost died in Devil's Canyon, but I also discovered something there that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. The knowledge that I have friends who will never give up on me, no matter what. Emma closed the notebook and looked around at her 4 friends. Thank you for saving my life. But more than that, thank you for showing me what it means to never give up on someone you love. The experience in Devil's Canyon had changed all 5 friends in ways that extended far beyond their hiking adventures. The lessons they learned about friendship, courage, and perseverance began to influence every aspect of their lives. David's experience as the medical leader during Emma's rescue led him to pursue additional training in wilderness medicine. He became certified as a wilderness first responder and began teaching emergency medicine courses for outdoor enthusiasts. What happened with Emma taught me that medical training is useless unless you're willing to take calculated risks to save lives. David explained to his students. Sometimes the safest medical decision isn't the right decision when someone's life is on the line. His courses became popular among hiking and climbing groups, and David often used Emma's rescue as a case study in field medicine and emergency decision-making. Marcus's photography took on a new dimension as he began documenting stories of human resilience and survival. His project Unbreakable Bonds featured photographs and interviews with people who had experienced life-threatening situations with friends or family members. Emma's rescue taught me that the most powerful photographs aren't always about beautiful landscapes Marcus reflected. Sometimes they are about capturing the strength of human connections under extreme pressure. His work began attracting attention from galleries and magazines, and he was commissioned to document several search and rescue operations and survival stories. Jake's obsession with safety planning evolved into a consulting business, helping outdoor organizations develop comprehensive emergency protocols. His experience with improvised rescue systems in Devil's Canyon gave him unique insights into what worked under real-world crisis conditions. Most emergency plans look good on paper, but fall apart when you're actually dealing with a life-threatening situation. Jake told his clients, "You need backup plans for your backup plans, and you need to practice making decisions under pressure." Sarah's experience with emergency communications led her to become an advocate for improved search and rescue coordination in remote areas. She worked with local emergency services to identify communication dead zones and develop strategies for reaching help from isolated locations. If I hadn't been able to establish radio contact when I did, Emma might not have survived. Sarah often said in her presentations to outdoor groups, communication isn't just about convenience. It can literally be the difference between life and death. But perhaps the most significant change was in how all 5 friends approached their relationships with each other and with other people in their lives. The experience of nearly losing Emma had taught them not to take their friendships for granted. Before Devil's Canyon, I thought friendship was about having fun together and being there for each other during normal problems. Emma reflected during an interview for Marcus's photography project. I didn't realize that true friendship means being willing to risk everything when someone you care about is in mortal danger. The 5 friends made a commitment to maintain their bond, regardless of where life took them. They established traditions for staying connected: monthly dinners, annual hiking trips, and regular check-ins about their lives and goals. What we learned in Devil's Canyon is that life is unpredictable. Sarah explained. You never know when you might need to depend on the people you care about, or when they might need to depend on you. We don't want to take those relationships for granted. 2 years after the accident, Emma had made a complete physical recovery. She was hiking regularly again, though she approached challenging terrain with more caution and respect than she had before her accident. "I'm not reckless anymore," Emma admitted. "I understand that the mountains can be dangerous, and I take that seriously. But I also understand that living in fear isn't really living at all." Emma had returned to teaching, and her experience had influenced her approach to education. She incorporated lessons about problem solving under pressure, teamwork, and perseverance into her curriculum. "My students are fascinated by the story of what happened in Devil's Canyon," Emma said. "But what they really connect with are the lessons about not giving up and about how people can accomplish incredible things when they work together." The 5 friends also began speaking together at outdoor clubs, safety seminars, and emergency preparedness workshops. Their story resonated with audiences because it demonstrated that ordinary people could face extraordinary challenges and survive through teamwork and determination. "We're not professional mountaineers or survival experts," Jake told one audience. "We're just friends who refused to give up on each other when everything went wrong. That's something anyone can do." Their story attracted media attention, and they were featured in several outdoor magazine and survival documentaries. But they were careful to emphasize that their experience wasn't about heroism. It was about the power of human relationships. "People call us heroes, but we don't see it that way," David explained in one interview. "We see ourselves as friends who did what friends do. We took care of each other when it mattered most." The psychological impact of their experience continued to influence their decisions and perspectives years later. They had learned that life could change in an instant, that normal safety assumptions could prove inadequate, and that survival often depended on the willingness of people to take risks for each other. "Devil's Canyon taught us that we're stronger than we thought we were," Marcus reflected. "But it also taught us that strength isn't just about individual capabilities. It's about what people can accomplish when they refuse to abandon each other." 5 years after the accident, the friends organized a return trip to Devil's Canyon. Not to the exact location where Emma had been trapped, that would have been too emotionally challenging, but to a safer area of the canyon where they could process their experience and celebrate Emma's recovery. "Going back wasn't about conquering our fears," Sarah explained. "It was about honoring what we went through and acknowledging how it changed us." The return trip was emotionally powerful for all of them. They spent time talking about their memories of the rescue, their individual struggles with recovery, and their gratitude for their continued friendship. "Standing in Devil's Canyon again, I realized that this place didn't just nearly take my life," Emma said. "It also gave me something invaluable: the absolute certainty that I have friends who will never give up on me, no matter what." 7 years after the accident in Devil's Canyon, the 5 friends had built lives that reflected the lessons they learned during those terrifying hours. Their bond had been tested by the ultimate crisis and had emerged stronger than ever. Emma had become a motivational speaker, sharing her story of survival and recovery with audiences across the country. Her message wasn't just about overcoming physical trauma. It was about the power of human connections to sustain people through impossible situations. "When I speak to audiences about what happened in Devil's Canyon," Emma often said, "I tell them that the real miracle wasn't that I survived being crushed by a boulder. The real miracle was that I had friends who were willing to risk everything to save me." Her presentations often moved audience members to tears, particularly when she described the moment she realized her friends were attempting to move the massive rock that had her trapped. "In that moment, lying in the darkness with tons of stone crushing my leg, I heard my friends above me, planning to risk their own lives to save mine. I realized that I was experiencing the purest form of love that exists: the willingness to sacrifice everything for someone else's survival." David had completed his wilderness medicine training and had become an instructor for emergency medical courses, specifically designed for outdoor enthusiasts. His classes were always oversubscribed, partly because of his technical expertise, but mostly because of his real-world experience. Medical training is important, David told his students, but what saved Emma's life wasn't just medical knowledge. It was the decision to take risks, to try interventions that could have made things worse, and to never give up even when the situation seemed hopeless. His courses included practical exercises in improvised rescue techniques, emergency communication, and medical decision-making under pressure. Many of his students were outdoor professionals who needed to be prepared for real-world crisis situations. Marcus had published a book of photography called Unbreakable, Stories of Survival and Friendship. The book featured Emma's story prominently, but it also included dozens of other accounts of people who had survived extreme situations through teamwork and mutual support. Emma's rescue taught me that the most powerful force in human survival isn't individual strength or technical knowledge, Marcus wrote in the book's introduction. It's the refusal to abandon the people you care about, even when abandonment would be easier and safer. The book became a bestseller and was credited with inspiring numerous acts of courage and compassion among its readers. Jake had built his emergency planning consulting business into a respected company that worked with outdoor recreation organizations, search and rescue teams, and wilderness therapy programs. His approach emphasized practical decision-making and improvised problem-solving over rigid protocols. Emergency plans that work on paper often fail in real situations, Jake explained to his clients. You need to be prepared to improvise, to take calculated risks, and to make decisions based on incomplete information. His company's motto, inspired by their experience in Devil's Canyon, was never give up, never leave behind. Sarah had become an advocate for improved emergency communication infrastructure in remote areas. She worked with government agencies and telecommunications companies to identify communication dead zones and develop solutions for reaching help from isolated locations. In our case, Emma survived partly because I was able to establish radio contact with emergency services, Sarah explained in her presentations to outdoor safety conferences. But what if I hadn't been able to get through? How many people die in remote areas simply because they can't call for help? Her advocacy work had led to the installation of emergency communication repeaters in several high-risk recreational areas, potentially saving dozens of lives. The five friends maintained their tradition of monthly dinners and annual hiking trips. Their conversations often returned to their experience in Devil's Canyon, not because they were obsessed with the trauma, but because it had become a defining moment in their understanding of friendship and survival. We don't talk about Devil's Canyon because we're stuck in the past, Emma explained during one of these dinners. We talk about it because it taught us who we really are and what we're capable of when we care about each other. Their annual hiking trips had become pilgrimages of sorts, opportunities to test their continued commitment to each other and to celebrate their bond. They chose challenging but safe routes, always with comprehensive emergency planning and communication protocols. Every year when we go hiking together, we're not just enjoying the outdoors, David reflected. We're reaffirming our promise to never give up on each other, no matter what challenges we face. The group had also begun mentoring other outdoor enthusiasts, particularly young people, who were just beginning to explore wilderness activities. They emphasized safety, preparation, and the importance of choosing hiking partners carefully. The people you hike with aren't just companions, Jake told the young hikers they mentor. They are the people who might have to save your life someday, or who you might have to save. Choose people you trust completely, and be someone others can trust completely. Emma's physical recovery had been complete for several years, but she continued to experience occasional nightmares about being trapped beneath the rocks. She had learned to view these episodes not as signs of weakness, but as reminders of what she had survived. The nightmares don't scare me anymore, Emma told a support group for trauma survivors. They remind me how strong I am, and they remind me how lucky I am to have friends who refuse to let me die alone in the darkness. 10 years after the accident, the five friends organized a special commemoration. They returned to Devil's Canyon, not to the site of Emma's accident, but to a beautiful overlook where they could reflect on their experience and its lasting impact on their lives. 10 years ago, this place nearly destroyed our group, Sarah said as they stood together, looking out over the canyon. Instead, it showed us what we were made of. Emma had prepared a special reading for the occasion, a reflection on the decade that had passed since her rescue. 10 years ago, I was trapped beneath tons of rock, certain that I was going to die. But I wasn't alone, because I could hear my friends' voices promising that they wouldn't give up on me. They kept that promise, even when keeping it required them to risk their own lives. In the decades since that day, we've all built lives that reflect what we learned in this canyon. We learned that friendship isn't just about sharing good times. It's about being willing to sacrifice everything when someone you care about is in danger. We learned that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things when they refuse to abandon each other. We learned that survival isn't just about individual strength. It's about the power of human connections to sustain us through impossible situations. Most importantly, we learned that giving up is always an option, but it's never the right option when someone you love is counting on you. 10 years ago, Devil's Canyon taught us what it means to never give up. Today, we're here to promise each other that we never will. As we reach the end of this remarkable story, it's important to understand that what happened in Devil's Canyon wasn't just about survival. It was about the power of human bonds to overcome impossible circumstances. 5 friends entered Devil's Canyon on what should have been a routine hiking adventure. What they discovered instead was that when everything goes wrong, when hope seems lost, and when giving up would be the easiest option, true friendship means holding on to each other, holding on to hope, holding on to the belief that no situation is truly hopeless as long as people refuse to abandon each other. Emma's rescue wasn't accomplished by professional mountaineers with specialized equipment. It wasn't achieved by survival experts with decades of experience. It was accomplished by 5 ordinary friends who made an extraordinary decision. They refused to give up. When Emma was trapped beneath thousands of pounds of rock, her friends could have justified waiting for professional rescue. They could have argued that attempting their own rescue was too dangerous, too risky, too likely to end in tragedy for everyone involved. Instead, they chose to act. They chose to risk everything they had, their own safety, their own lives, to give their friend a chance to survive. David chose to enter an unstable rock crevice to provide medical care, knowing their collapse could kill both him and Emma. Jake chose to engineer an improvised lifting system with equipment never designed for such forces, knowing that losing control could crush Emma completely. Marcus and Sarah chose to put their entire body weight behind a lever system that could fail catastrophically at any moment. Sarah chose to climb alone through dangerous terrain to establish emergency communication, knowing that Emma's life depended on her success. Most importantly, all 5 friends chose to believe that Emma's life was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any effort they could make. Their story demonstrates that survival isn't just about individual strength, technical knowledge, or specialized equipment. Survival is often about the willingness of people to hold on to each other, when holding on becomes the hardest thing in the world to do. In the years since Devil's Canyon, Emma, David, Marcus, Sarah, and Jake have used their experience to help others understand the power of refusing to give up. Through their speaking, their writing, their teaching, and their advocacy work, they've shared the lessons they learned in that terrifying and transformative experience. The lesson isn't that everyone should attempt dangerous rescues or take unnecessary risks. The lesson is that when the people we care about are facing impossible situations, we have a choice. We can give up, or we can hold on. We can accept that some situations are hopeless, or we can refuse to believe that hopelessness is ever the final answer. We can prioritize our own safety and comfort, or we can be willing to sacrifice our own well-being for the survival of others. Emma's story is remarkable not because she survived being crushed by a boulder, though that survival was indeed miraculous. Emma's story is remarkable because when she needed them most, her friends chose to hold on. They held on when moving the boulder seemed impossible. They held on when Emma's condition was deteriorating. They held on when their improvised rescue system was failing. They held on when professional rescue seemed too far away. They held on when every rational calculation suggested that their efforts were futile. And because they held on, Emma is alive today. She's teaching children, inspiring audiences, and continuing to explore the mountains that she loves. She's living proof that holding on to hope, to each other, to the belief that love is stronger than any obstacle, can overcome even the most impossible circumstances. 10 years later, the five friends continue to hold on to each other. Their bond, tested by the ultimate crisis, has only grown stronger with time. They've learned that true friendship isn't just about sharing adventures and good times. It's about being willing to risk everything when someone you care about needs you to hold on. Their story reminds us that in our own lives, when we face situations that seem hopeless, when the people we care about are struggling, when giving up would be easier than continuing to fight, we have the same choice that Emma's friends had in Devil's Canyon. We can give up, or we can hold on. We can accept defeat, or we can refuse to believe that any situation is truly hopeless, as long as people are willing to support each other. We can prioritize our own comfort and safety, or we can be willing to take risks for the people we love. The friends who saved Emma's life in Devil's Canyon weren't superheroes. They weren't professional rescuers with specialized training. They were ordinary people who made an extraordinary choice when it mattered most. They chose to hold on, and that choice made all the difference. As we conclude this episode of Hold On, Survival Stories, remember that each of us has the capacity to be someone's lifeline when they need it most. Each of us has the opportunity to choose holding on over giving up when the people we care about are facing their darkest moments. Emma's friends didn't just save her life in Devil's Canyon. They demonstrated the power that all of us possess when we refuse to abandon hope, refuse to abandon each other, and refuse to accept that any situation is truly hopeless. In your own life, when faced with impossible circumstances, when the people you care about need you most, when holding on becomes the hardest thing you've ever done, remember Emma's story. Remember that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things when they choose to hold on. Hold on to hope. Hold on to each other. Hold on to the belief that love is stronger than any obstacle. Because sometimes, holding on is the only thing that stands between survival and tragedy. And sometimes, that's enough. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Hold On, Survival Stories. If you have a survival story that demonstrates the power of holding on when everything seems lost, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, remember, no matter how dark the situation, no matter how hopeless things seem, never give up on the people you love. Keep holding on. This episode of Hold On, Survival Stories was dedicated to all the search and rescue professionals, emergency medical personnel, and ordinary people who risk their own safety to help others in crisis. Special thanks to the Colorado Search and Rescue Association and the Flight for Life helicopter rescue teams who save lives in the mountains every day.